So let's have our team introduce themselves. If Ashley, you want to go first?
Yes, hi, I'm Ashley Bennis. I'm in Corpus Christi. I am a planning specialist with the Texas Sea Grant.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Goldberg. I'm in the Department of Geography here at Texas A&M.
Unmute. I'm Doug Wanneberger. I'm in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Urban Planning, and I collect most of the data that you'll see, the GIS data.
Thank you. And then Nicole, it would be really great to learn who you are and where you're from. Maybe she's having trouble unmuting. Okay, well, we'll just move forward, but if you ever want to chime in, please feel free, and we're just going to go through today an overview of the tool, and then we're going to walk through a demo of what it's like using the tool. And that's when it would be really great to get any questions and have some discussion around it. So what is the tool? It's a community mapping platform, and it's really about enhancing interactive planning activities, whether it's among your local government staff, whether it's with key stakeholders for planning activities, or also we envision this as being a feature that could be used by the public in a variety of different workshops. And it can really enable decision makers to make wise decisions and more resilient decisions about development. We know that communities along the coast, in particular, have few resources, and many of the communities we work with here at Texas Target Communities at Texas A&M work with lower capacity communities, and they particularly have issues or limited resources for mapping and GIS. And so this tool is aiming to sort of facilitate those activities and enable a better understanding of the state of your community with respect to different sets of layers that we'll be looking at: hazard exposures, physical vulnerabilities, and social vulnerabilities. And really the main objective for the tool is to provide a simple, user-friendly, web-based GIS tool to assist with your different needs, your planning needs. So, okay, I'm seeing now Nicole's comment in the chat. Welcome. So glad you joined us from San Patricio. So why we really think the tool can inform whether you're going through and doing planning, comprehensive planning, whether you're doing a future land use map, whether you're making amendments to local ordinances and regulations, or whether you're thinking about you know, how effective and resilient, or some of the choices around some of your future capital improvement projects. And we envision that the users, whether it's planners or local officials or community stakeholders, could also query data and then create custom maps based on different development scenarios that you might envision for yourself. That way, we can have a better understanding of future growth and future growth issues that there might be related to hazards. This is really meant to be for local government, for local government staff and community stakeholders. We originally had for the in-depth workshops folks from academia or larger capacity cities that already had GIS capability. So this is, we're seeing this more as filling a gap for the places that have limited access to data or capacity to analyze data. And how, you know, originally we envisioned this as being something that could be done in person, and we still think that it could be done in person. But we also now, having shifted through COVID, see this as a great virtual workshop platform where we can have different breakout groups, we can have you know, teams or groups that are all looking at the same information, but they might be interpreting things different or thinking about what future needs and development patterns might be. Okay, so as you'll see when we do the demo, there are sets of data layers, and we're looking at some of the existing conditions, we're calling these snapshots. We're basically taking a snapshot of your community to understand maybe hotspots or areas of concern. So we'll have 3 different types of snapshots. We'll have the environment and hazard snapshot, which we can pull all sorts of environmental data from hazards like floodplains or surge models. Also just other environmental features and components that might be in your community like parks or wildlife protected areas. We can also pull land use types like agriculture. So as we go through the tool, we also recognize that the data is only good as the data that we get. So working with the community to sort of ground truth and add additional points and data as we go and have conversations. So if we know that there's a area that might be more likely to be flooding, but it's not necessarily articulated or delineated on the flood map, we can go ahead and do that now. The other snapshot that we'll look at is the built environment. And this is essentially areas that might be more physically vulnerable, or these are the things in your community, among your community facilities, or might be considered critical facilities when it comes to a disaster response or recovery. So the kinds of data we have pulled are obviously things like schools, hospitals. We also have hotels and other sort of city services. Again, though, the data is only good as the data we have. So this is a particularly good time for this snapshot because a lot of that data is very localized for us to go ahead and add additional points and polygons as needed based on what you need and what you have. The final snapshot we're calling social characteristics, and we're essentially looking at demographic data and a number of different needs that might be of importance in a disaster response and recovery, and also inform development or planning decisions on blue sky days as well. So I'll explain that a little bit further in this next slide. So essentially we're pulling data from the U.S. Census American Community Survey, and we're calling these 5 different categories different needs. And those needs are basically, we're pulling specific data from a specific type of demographic data from the census. So for instance, childcare needs, we're really looking at where are our single parent households and where are the households with children under 5. So if you have those 2 characteristics, then you're more likely to have childcare needs in general, right? But also in times of disaster, that would be absolutely critical. So elder care needs, we're looking at those who are 65 and older, which households are they, and then which ones that are 65 and older and also in poverty. Transportation needs, we're looking at those who might be more dependent on public transit and also those households with no vehicle. We also look at housing needs or shelter needs, depending on how you look at it. But these would be people, the vacant housing units, those who are renters, non-white population, the population that is in group quarters. Also structures that are built before 2000 would be more vulnerable, mobile homes, as well as the population in poverty. And finally, we have civic capacity needs, and those are, we're looking at 4 indicators for that. The households without telephones, those without a high school diploma, those that are unemployed, and then those that are speaking English not very well. So those are all specific data that we pulled, and these types of social characteristics and needs are all been heavily researched and cited based on different disasters across the country and also specifically Texas. So after we go through the 3 snapshots, we're then going to take some time to think about what the development scenario might be. And so this would be the point where each table or each group would kind of envision where they see future growth areas, development, construction, or areas that need to be maintained for conservation or held without development. So we'll essentially stack the different snapshots, and it'll help us kind of make decisions about where these sort of growth areas or conservation areas might need to be. So we could look at a number of different things, and again, we'll walk through it here in a second, but it could be a matter of where residential housing would likely go, or where we could steer it away from certain hazards. Obviously, any type of land use, like mixed-use development, commercial areas as well. Again, like I mentioned, the conservation areas would be something we could consider, as well as transportation needs and access, particularly as it would be needed for evacuation or other sort of emergency services. So at this point, I'll just show you some visuals, and then we'll actually get to run and jump into the tool. So when you open the tool, you'll essentially see a left panel with the description of what you're seeing, the snapshot that you're looking at. There'll also be some drawing tools that are there, and that's where you can add any additional localized data, and it will be saved and be something that then you could export later for other uses on other sort of GIS software systems, or come back to it and we can still play and add with it later. You'll also see on the, we also have a list of layers and a legend, so all of which you can turn things on and off to make things a little bit easier for you to here we're looking at the community facilities, or in this case today, we're calling it the built environment snapshot, with lots of different points and data and layers that we could be looking at. I just want to point out the bottom pane of this image has sort of a running bar to show you kind of where you're at along the course of the different phases or rounds of the workshop and the process that we'll be walking through. And finally, or not finally, but the final snapshot is the social characteristics. So we'll get to see some of those social needs, and we can look at them, of course, one by one and all stacked together. Here's another example. And then finally, the scenario phase, where we get to probably do a lot more drawing, a lot more exploratory thinking. This is, again, a very exploratory tool, something that would then inform the ways in which you would go about developing a future land use map or doing comprehensive planning or the other planning needs that you might have. Okay, I'm gonna pause there. And before we jump into the demo, is there anyone on our team that has anything to add that I missed?
Hi, this is Dan. Just a general comment about why we built this tool. So You may have participated in prior planning exercises where there were printed maps and members of the community or member of the organizational staff would go around and either put sticky notes or draw various colors to indicate things on the paper map. That has worked well for 100, 200 years, but it adds additional work that someone has to do after the workshop. So if you're lucky enough to have an intern working for you, you could tell her or him, all right, I need you to go and digitize these shapes that someone from the community or one of our staff members drew on the map, because we want to capture it. So that way when we're doing our planning or when we have to make a presentation to leadership later on, we can see the things that the community generated. So this is a completely digital tool, meaning that as community members draw shapes or indicate areas of concern or of opportunity, that information is automatically and immediately captured in a way that works with any kind of mapping tool. So this allows you to save on that kind of work where you have to think back and remember, why did this person draw this thing? What were they talking about? Where were we at in the workshop? And as Jamie mentioned, it allows you to reuse that data in the future. So it's stored digitally, it's in a GIS format. So if you wanted to export it or use it in Google Earth or in any other kind of GIS, you have it available. And finally, what it allows you to do is stack those on top of each other. So if you have meetings with different stakeholder groups who have different opinions and priorities, you'll be able to see those differences visually, or you'll be able to see where people are agreeing that an area should be protected or an area should be prioritized for development. So we hope and we think that this will make for more effective professional planning work, because it will make the data easier to access, easier to record, easier to display and talk about and think about. So I just wanted to mention that real quick.
Great, thank you, Dan. That was helpful clarifier for how we see this tool benefiting and functioning. So I'm gonna, if there's not questions, I'm sure there are, but I think it might be helpful for us to jump into the demo, and that way you might get to see things in real time. So you can still see my screen, correct? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and kind of give you some context. We're going to walk through an example of the city of Kingsville, and I think that's down near where you are, but not quite in your county, Nicole. And but I think Ashley is going to give us a little bit of context of setting the stage for us, and then I'll describe some of the functions as we go.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so the city of Kingsville, located in Clayburgh County and just north of Baffin Bay, has a population of about 25,000. And they recently, for some of the tributaries that lead into the bay, they're impaired. And so they have some water quality issues. So they recently finished a watershed protection plan to address that. So they've got some ideas for the city and county for that. And then they're in the process of updating their comprehensive plan. So they just reviewed their old plan and now they're moving on into public engagement for their comprehensive plan. So we went through this with them, and they were able to some stuff, and we're hoping to use something like this to engage with their community, to start these conversations and to have a visual overlay of that. And they recently had lots of because of all the rivers that go through the community, they have a lot of drainage issues. They had a huge rain event that caused feet of flooding in the neighborhoods, and people were unable to evacuate. And so they received some money to address drainage. So they are looking at hotspots and key areas in their community to address drainage. So we were also speaking with them about that. And I think that's a pretty good overview.
Okay, so let's jump into some of the questions that we asked, as well as we could think about asking depending on what's going on in your community. And of course, each workshop can be tailored, and the questions can be tailored to some of the needs that are present in the community. But you'll see at the bottom, again, that pane. And so we're here starting at the beginning in the environment and hazards snapshot. We also have a little brief description of what it is, as well as the drawing functions that are all on the panel here. If you look at the top left, we also have layers listed, and I'll zoom out a little bit here. We can turn things on and off, and so actually, interestingly, the surge data that we have is kind of coming up really close and around their naval air station there, and really kind of limiting some of the development that can happen east. But we can also look at these other sort of data that we've pulled, and we have these across the state, so we can see wetlands across the state. We can see rookeries. I don't believe there are any over here. Wildlife refuges and or refuges and that kind of thing. So we can also see the particular legend of what we're looking at, and everything in this sort of bright blue color is actually their special flood hazard area, their 1% chance of flooding, or also called the 100-year floodplain. So when we had conversations with them and the planning staff, there was actually a lot of discussion about the extent to which, or how large the floodplain actually was, and that being really concerning because this is their older part of town on this more north side. But what were some other questions we asked, Ashley?
So because Kingsville was particularly interested in flooding, we asked some questions about where they experience ponding and where they experience roads that don't have the floodwaters drain away. So we were trying to get an idea of which neighborhoods maybe have one road in and could impede evacuation. So we were having that identified. The creek you see there runs through the middle of town, and mostly it's a low flow creek, but there are some crossings that during a high tide event or during a rain event that has evacuation issues. So we asked them to identify some of those regions.
We can
Conservation
do that
areas.
right now.
Yeah, we can. If we want to zoom in. If we want to zoom in, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I just want to show a little bit of the function, and maybe we'll do a point. And so maybe we can say this particular spot is the sort of low water crossing, and let's use a circle. And that way we can kind of go through and identify some of those. I think you said another part of town was down south, right?
Yeah.
As a low water crossing. So we can use the drawing functions to kind of help us develop those localized data, and that will pull on, and you'll see later on, it'll come back up when we look at the scenario together.
Yeah.
Anything else that I should point out, actually?
I mean, I think that's good for now. I mean, there's questions about, the wetlands and maybe sites that they're seeing degradation that could be a problem if wetlands or certain natural buffers along the floodplains. So I think you guys identified some conservation areas that the city is interested in maintaining.
Yes, and so we could use this, I'm going to change the color here. We can use this sort of, oh, it's there, okay. This little star tool to create like a different kind of shape. And just kind of generally, what we had done before was kind of draw out what could be a buffer. The development is mostly happening north, but I think there was some concern, so be mindful of that. Give you a sense of what it was.
Yeah.
As an example. So, other questions that we could ask, I guess, would also be, anything else?
The ones I'm thinking of for community facilities and like where do you store, looking at the flood hazard zones, where do you store your critical infrastructure or the cars that you need for EMS or evacuation, like where are those stored and are they in a hazard zone? So those are some of the questions.
Well, we'll move to that next snapshot then, and show you. So this is a whole different set of data that we're looking at. So I'll open up the legend to give you a sense of what we're looking at. So the item in blue is obviously where their naval station, they have their naval air station there. But we can also identify where the police stations are, fire stations. If I zoom out, we also have wind turbines available across the state. So that's helpful in certain parts of Texas. And everything in the dark blue, those are our public schools. And then the green, you're seeing the hotels, and the larger the square, the higher the occupancy or the number of beds that are in that. And I guess the reasoning for that is as we think about disasters, evacuation, recovery, those are critical facilities for communities as they're kind of trying to bounce back and get folks back in their homes. So
we will start with the community to ground truth this, to see, make sure that to the best of their knowledge, does everything look right? And then is there anything we're missing? Is there a fire department somewhere that we didn't get through the data? And so we can add spots and, different types of location indicators to show those critical facilities. That will show up later as far as when we have all the layers added together.
And depending on the community too, this map can look different. When we worked with another community, we had the building footprints data. So here you're looking at the parcels, but we actually had on the map itself, the building footprints. You can see it here from the base map, but that was a helpful layer as we were planning as well. So
yeah. And we might ask, where do you guys have any shelters in this region or places that have dual purposes, where they have one function when there isn't a disaster or hazard risk, and then can it serve as another function that meets the community needs? Are there transportation lines in areas where we know there are social vulnerabilities or, needs like that?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it is a lot of ground truthing and getting at. So one of the conversations when we were talking with Kingsville was they identified their downtown here, and you'll see that on the development scenario. And so we created a circle around this area as their downtown as being a critical economic asset for them. Also, they talked about they want to begin doing more neighborhood planning, and so they identified this area down here as being sort of focus area that needed some more attention and more investment. So we drew those on, and they'll be populated on the scenario map. Are there any questions here, or anyone want to chime in as additional thoughts?
I think that's pretty straightforward.
Okay, so then we'll jump to social characteristics. And at the moment, the data is a bit zoomed out, but we can make it zoom in more. This is just today, is the day that we're gonna have it be zoomed out. But you can see on the left the different needs that we were talking about. So this one right here, we're looking at childcare needs. And so we can see more on that northern, eastern side of town, more childcare needs. And each one can stack. So here's elder care needs. Here is transportation needs, shelter needs. And they're all in and around the same area, but slightly changing for Kingsville. And so as a team, we circled and identified, you know, the particular part of town that they knew that they needed to focus more on and provide maybe some more investments or programming for those areas. So I think that is all we'll show for now, and I think the next scenario component it'll make more sense how all these things are coming together. So again, the 3 snapshots are all just looking at existing conditions, and so then the scenario, and it'll load here, and it'll look very busy because all the data is coming in. And then my computer's gonna lag a little for you. But we can turn layers on and off, so if something's becoming a little too distracting. So I think for now, we'll take off. What do I want to take off? I want to take off the parcels for now. So here are some of the accumulation of discussions we had. So I'll kind of walk you through. So some of the things we are seeing is we see this polygon that we drew on that first phase. That was, oh, we really want to make sure that there is this buffer from the floodplain here. If I turn off, I'm wondering, I am not seeing another one. If I turn off the environment hazards layer, you can see the other little red dot or circle we created that was, this is our issue or evacuation route or low water crossing area here. Additionally, this was the downtown area that I mentioned that they wanted to make sure that they focused on maintaining and providing investments here. Everything in orange, we had talked and identified and circled, created a layer about this is really the area that's most socially vulnerable. So you can see the most socially vulnerable areas that are overlaid with the floodplain. That would probably be the priority area or street to kind of start. If there are some infrastructure improvement plans or drainage plans that could focus in on those areas first.
Yeah.
Other things oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, for example, you know, they're getting all this drainage, money for drainage projects. And if they're trying to identify where that money might be most useful, this could help them to say, okay, so we might need to do some work in that particular area. So that could be, this tool could help them decide that.
Exactly. And then this other area, though it wasn't really popping up on our social vulnerability data, they identified this as one of their focus areas. This is like a neighborhood that needs more attention. So that sort of local information and that data that we can draw on. And so we knew that, you know, in terms of as they're thinking about their new comprehensive plan, making sure that there are specific policies and strategies and recommendations for that area. Okay, and you're also seeing, to go back to our floodplain buffer, they identified these green areas as being existing agriculture, and they wanted to see if there's a way that they can maintain that as agriculture to help act as the buffer, so that as new suburbs and residential housing were being built, that they weren't being built in such close proximity to the floodplain. So there could be a number of different strategies and policy tools that they can use to see if it can be maintained as ag. And then finally, the other thing you're seeing here is this large purple rectangle, and that is a zone in an area that they have in mind to, well, part of it is industrial, but they have in mind for it to be sort of the more industrial zone of the city next to the Naval Air Station. So in terms of thinking about future land use, they wanted to sort of identify that as an industrial zone. So those are some of the conversations we had, and what kind of other questions, I guess Ashley first, is anything else we need to add or think about so folks understand how this could be used?
Yeah, so I guess in consideration for like County Department of Health and people who work in that area, maybe you could identify in the ground truthing snapshots as far as like where you know there's water quality or air quality issues. So you could identify that, and then we would bring them all together to look at the social characteristics and stuff. We could identify maybe where you should shy away from development because it's a known, you know, hazard for air quality, or if there should be more investment in that region to help with that. So that's kind of something to think about as far as, you know, if you're the Department of Health, things you might be wanting to understand better.
Also, if you were to do this as a workshop with multiple groups, what would happen is each team would be developing and drawing their scenarios or the things that they're seeing based on their experience or expertise or otherwise. And then we could pull all of that information together on one map, and then we can see where there might be overlaps or you know, commonalities and differences between what people are thinking the strategies or development considerations should be. So anything that the other team members want to add?
I think that's great.
Are there any questions? I know that Nicole's audio is not working.
Yeah.
So maybe there are questions bubbling up, and you're welcome to put them in the chat. Or maybe it's something that you can come back to as you work with your team. But pause for a second.
And yeah, and I don't know if we're sharing the recording, but we'll have that option if more team members want to kind of watch the demo and see how it works. And then if you have any follow-up questions, you want to reach out to us. We're available and ready.
Absolutely. And another feature, though, I did mention it, but we can take these new polygons and shapes that we've created, everything that was produced today, would then be exported and get sent and used at different, with different GIS software and applications. Or it could be reused on the same application. Well, with that, if there aren't any questions, I just want to thank you for attending today to learn more about the tool. Please reach out to us if you have any interest in exploring the tool more. We thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and a spring break if you get one.
I just want to wrap up with, this is free and open source. So we hope to get as many communities and professional planners using this as possible. Our hope is that people will find it an effective way of holding meetings and allowing people to express their differing opinions in a way that's capturable and reviewable visually and geographically.
Dan. All right. Well, thank you for attending today. We're happy to also share the recording, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for joining, Nicole. Yeah. Stop recording.